Canada, one of the largest and most beautiful countries on earth, established in 1867, was originally called the Dominion of Canada. This name, agreed upon by the Fathers of Confederation, originates from the Bible. In Psalm 72, verse 8, it says, "He shall have dominion from sea to sea," clearly referring to this vast new land of Canada stretching from the Atlantic on the east to the Pacific Ocean on the west. Most of the founders hoped and prayed that the Almighty would have dominion indeed in the affairs of this newborn country. But since the very beginning of Canada, those ignorant of the Creator and His blessings have tried to remove any godly connection to this unique land. The battle goes on to this very day. There are, however, many exceptions, Jewish and Christian alike. One of them is the Martin family, descendants of godly Christians called Mennonites, who settled in the Brooks and Dutchess area of southeastern Alberta. Much like the Jews in the 1600s, the European Anabaptist sect of the Mennonites were severely persecuted for their faith, including murder, burning, and land pillage. By the early 1730s, Bill's ancestor, Christian Martin, fled Canton Bern in Switzerland to North America, ending up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The elder Martin and family joined an ever-growing and successful Mennonite and Amish farming community west of Philadelphia. But by 1885, Samuel Martin was born and he became an agent of change. Restless and longing for new adventure, he led his young family westward to Canada. He selected Alberta in order to join an already growing Mennonite settlement that included relatives and friends. Join us now as we introduce you to Bill Martin, the eldest son of John Martin, a direct descendant of Samuel Martin. Bill and his wife Audrey are now retired, living in his ancestral home in Dutchess. Follow us now as we explore their lives to discover the biblical reasons for their success in farming, prosperity in business, effectiveness in church planting, and blessed family unity.
Rocks and plains and visions of trains from sea to sea. Forêts et lacs, aurore boréale du grand nord silencieux.
Mountains of snow, forests below, hopes and fears.
Frozen lands in the rugged hands of Canadian pioneers. This is my Canada.
This is my home, my nation.
From St. John's to Victoria. This is my Canada. This is my Canada. Canada. Oh, Canada.
I think ever since I was probably about 12 years old or so, a lot of the responsibility of the farm came to me. I just liked it. Dad would say, go do it, and so you went and figured out how to do it. It's part of life, of learning.
I am a very privileged person to have grown up in a Christian family and have known about the love of God all my life.
Both Bill and Audrey's families came from Europe to the USA, seeking to find good farmland that was free of prejudice and persecution. By the early 1900s, they found a safe haven in Canada.
My great-great-grandfather and his family had a mill and lived in Switzerland where they ground grain into flour. And I know from family history that this mill was burned down twice because they were Anabaptist people and persecuted for their beliefs. But they stood strong and true through it all. This is a picture of my great-grandparents, Christian and Catherine Roth Zare. They were called Amish Mennonite people who believed in separation from the world, and they were also pacifists who did not believe in going to war, so they had some very strong beliefs that distinguished them from other Christian denominations.
Audrey's family settled in Tofield, Alberta, 200 kilometers north of Dutchess, so the chances of Bill and Audrey meeting were quite slim.
I love family. Family is very important to me, and one of the ways I preserve those happy memories is by keeping scrapbooks. And this is one of my favorite pictures of me when I was a little girl, and I still remember well the day that picture was taken. My mother made that dress for me, and I had very long hair, and I usually wore it in braids, but occasionally on a special day like that, I got to have ringlets.
Building there, the front part is where we used to milk cows. We'd milk cows, and we'd carry the milk up to that little white building over there. And my mother would bottle it, and then we would take it to Dutchess, which is only about a quarter of a mile away here, and then we would peddle the milk up and down the back alleys. The people would leave their money out in the quart jars, and we would pick up the empties and leave the full ones there. And so I guess we learned business at a young age. I don't know, but it was a lot of work, but it was fine. I remember there's a couple things my father used to say that I always kind of remembered. He said, you know, there's no disgrace in being poor, it's just a little inconvenient.
Growing up on a farm with 3 sisters and a brother, along with parents who were committed Christians, Bill had an understanding about God, but as time went on, his spiritual hunger increased.
You know, growing up, I remember at the age of 13, it was quite interesting. They had what they called revival meetings at that time in the little church we attended, and I'll never forget it. The guy came through and he talked about hell. I still remember this sermon. I couldn't believe that he wouldn't shut up so I could get saved, but he finally did get done, and I made my way forward, and I asked Jesus Christ into my life. And I still remember it was the night I went out and I knew I was saved. You can't tell me I wasn't saved, because I went out, the stars were brighter, everything was different. And I never forgot that at that young age.
I met this young man, Bill Martin, many years ago while I was at a youth camp in Hungry Horse, Montana. The first thing I noticed about Bill Martin was his happy smile and his beautiful white teeth. And he was always so happy and made me feel happy, and usually the life of the party, and had everyone just laughing and just really enjoying life and a very positive attitude. The Mennonite churches had different occasions, conferences in July usually, and occasionally a youth camp. Well, it was because Bill and I lived 200 miles apart. He lived at Dutchess, Alberta, and I lived at Camrose. So there was not much chance of us ever getting together except for these events that were great for intermingling with other Christian young people, and it was there that we first dated. And I was in university in Edmonton the following year, and he would come up about once a month and visit me, and we had a back and forth long distance relationship. We'd talk on the phone about once a week. And he hated writing letters, so he hardly ever wrote a letter, but he did write me a letter. Twice I received letters from him, and I was afraid to open them for fear it was going to be bad news. But apparently he never had that idea in mind, so we were married in August of 1962.
He says in his word, he'll never leave you nor forsake you, and he has never left. and I'm so grateful for that. I got married in a fairly young age. I met Audrey Sittler, and I had sorted through a little bit, and when I met her, I was pretty happy about that, and this is 54 years later, and I'm still happy about it. We've had a very wonderful home and been blessed with 3 children, a girl and 2 boys, and the Lord has blessed us in so many ways.
Bill and Audrey's dairy business was going well, and life went on. One day, some friends mentioned to Bill and Audrey that they had had an experience that they wanted to share with them.
I remember they wanted to take us to a happening that was taking place in Oregon in the States. And she was very interested in us going down there. So we went down there and with them. And I remember turning around, looking at her at the back seat. And I said to her, "Do you speak in tongues?" And I could tell she kind of froze up and she kind of didn't want to answer me. And I'm a little forceful when I want to know something. And I proceeded till she finally said, "Yes, I do." And well, that was okay with me. I just wanted to know, but I wasn't into that type of thing. And I wanted her to know it too.
At the meeting on the second day, a missionary from South America spoke, and this opened up Bill and Audrey. They went forward for prayer.
I'll never forget that experience. I got up from there and I went into the washroom and I had tears in my eyes, and I felt this ball of love growing in me. It was just like a ball. I thought I was going to explode from this love I felt. I even loved those guys after that. And I didn't say too much because I wasn't one that liked to be in front of people, and they had said if something happens to you, come back the next day and share it, and I didn't want to. I told the people that we'd taken along, I said, "We're going home tomorrow." So we went home, and I come home, didn't really say anything to anybody, but people would come up to me and they'd say, "Bill, you're different. You got a power or something about you. There's something different." I knew something happened, and so that's the way it went. It was really a life-changing experience for us. Audrey had about the same experience at about the same time in a very similar way, both that night.
We were dairy farmers when we were first married, so I'd go out in the barn and help him milk cows. And we were blessed with 3 children. First came our daughter Kim, and she was a joy. I think that was one of the happiest days of my life when I became a mother. I always loved babies so much, and to have my own was the joy of my life.
It was a dairy farm when I took over from my parents. They moved to town and I bought it and we dairied there. And then after, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 years or so, I had a fire. Actually, Audrey and I were up at the Jubilee Auditorium in Calgary at some kind of a show. And I got the phone, over the phone it came when we're sitting in the Jubilee Auditorium. "Bill Martin, you wanted on the phone?" And I thought, oh my, what's happened? We had our daughter, we didn't have our sons at that time. And we thought for sure, well, something must have happened to our daughter. But I got on the phone and it was my father, and he said, "Well, your dairy barn's on fire, just burnt down." So actually, in a way, it was kind of a relief. It wasn't something that couldn't be replaced anyway, but and it worked out not too bad because I was getting behind on the feed payments pretty near. I was having a hard time making, and I got insurance.
When the dairy barn was destroyed by fire, Bill and Audrey found favor with a kindly neighbor who was also a dairyman. He offered to let them bring their herd of cows to be milked in his barn. But his bulk milk tank was too small for the milk production of 2 herds, and the milk overflowed the tank and ran down the drain. A short time later, another neighbor bought the dairy cows. What a blessing that was.
3 years later came our first son, Kevin, and he was just a strong, muscular little boy right from day one, and the joy of our life as well. And at 3 years later, along came Brent, and he is a blonde, blue-eyed boy, and many times I had people ask me, is he adopted? How can a woman with such dark hair have a blonde little boy? So I had to tell them that his father was a blonde little boy once upon a time, and that's where he got it. But he is, of our 3 children, he is the one that is the most like his father, and he loves meeting people, and he breaks down the walls between people very easily and has a real gift with that. But we had a wonderful family and cherish each one of our children, and we're so happy that each one of them has found a Christian mate, and our grandchildren love and serve the Lord as well.
You know, it was interesting with life. After that happened, the opportunity came for my dad and my brother and I to buy an auction market in Brooks. It's a place where you sold cattle, and so we went down and we purchased this. And I remember the first sale we were going to have in the fall. You have calf sales here in the fall, and we'd have thousands of cattle would come through in the fall. But this first sale that we were going to make the big splash, my brother and I sat there and all we got was 3 calves. And my dad came in the morning. He said, well, this is ridiculous. We got to get some cattle. So he went out to a rancher and talked him into bringing in a bunch of calves. And so my dad was very clever in a way. He had all these order buyers. He gave them orders to buy the cattle. So it was really a hot sale. What I mean by that, the cattle really sold well. But what the people didn't know after the sale, my dad owned them pretty near all, because he'd have different buyers buying for him. But people went away, and it actually pushed us forward, and we had a very successful deal with the livestock auction market.
Life with Bill has been quite an adventure, and that was quite an adjustment for me. Living on the yard as we did with our 3 children, there was a lot of traffic in and out of that yard, and in the fall when the cows and calves were brought into market, it was a lot of bellowing and mooing going on, and the big trucks coming in and out, and I wondered how I would ever get used to it. But I got to work, and pretty soon I didn't even hear the traffic in the yard anymore.
Well, we were living on the yard at that time, and there was a lot of things went on around the auction market. I didn't want to raise my kids around it after I seen what was happening. And I remember we were sitting at the supper table one night, and in came a guy that was very highly inebriated with his pants peed, and I said to Audrey, I'm not raising my kids here.
Bill decided he had had enough of that and decided he wanted to go farming again, and he had opportunity to buy a farm out at Dutchess, and it was a place that I used to look at from across the field from the first farm where we lived and say, oh, I wish I lived there. Never dreaming that I would have the privilege of moving to this wonderful location where the soil is so rich and the trees grow so well, and it's been a joy living here.
And it was shortly after that I got an opportunity to buy a couple farms in the Dutchess area, of which we're on one right here today. And so we bought them. My dad and brother bought me out, and I came out here and bought this land and farmed. I've always liked farming, enjoyed farming, and the Lord has really blessed us in so many ways. And I think the key to success probably is getting God's idea and then flowing with it. I think too often people go in, plunge in and do something and then say, God bless it. Well, God might say, I didn't even want you doing what you're doing. But if you can find out what God wants you to do before you do it, God doesn't want you to fail. And I've always felt that way. I've always felt blessed. Even when things maybe were a little tough, I felt blessed because I knew God was with me.
Bill was farming, and one day went into a machinery dealership, and the owner of the business offered him the opportunity to be the purchaser of this farm equipment business that he was wanting to sell.
And so we had got farming again, and like I say, I enjoyed farming. And then one day I went into a machinery dealership, and I didn't even deal there, and I went in and just bought an 83-cent part. And this guy got me in the back, or in his office, and it was a very successful business, and I knew people had tried to buy it before. And he said, "Bill, I'll sell you this business." And I said, "I'm not remotely interested in getting back in business." Then I came home and I thought, oh man, I hadn't done that. I don't know, it was a challenge kind of to think about doing that. And so what I really did in this very house in the basement, I met with 2 pastors and their wives, and we had a prayer meeting. And when we got up from that prayer meeting, I knew I was supposed to buy the business, and they knew it too.
They sold tractors and combines and hay balers and other farm equipment.
We made a deal, and it turned out to be a good deal. In fact, I was blessed. It was interesting. With anything you do to succeed, you need good people. And I had good people lined up to help me in the business. And I'll tell you one thing, I don't care if it's a business, a church, or what you're doing. When I walked in there and I was the owner of the business, I was the boss. And I used to tell Audrey, you know, it's funny, I just feel like one of the guys. And when you think that through, that's right. You won't have a big business if you don't have good people working for you. And all my success too has been to have good people to help you build whatever you're doing, be it a church, business, whatever it is. And I'm always grateful to the ones that work for me. So I went there, and here I had all these guys working for me, but I had the right people in position. I'd hired the right people. And I remember driving home the first day, and I thought, these people can steal me blind. And I remember making a mental thing that I'm going to trust them. And I didn't lose hardly anything. I trusted them, and we had a very good time. It was fun. We won a lot of trips. God blessed the business.
He was a very busy man, but we adjusted, and he stayed in that business for 3 years, I believe it was. And then we went farming again, and he said, I never want to serve the public again. So it was, I think, 6 years later when God called him to start a church in Brooks.
When we sold out, we went into the cattle business here. We farmed. We usually always run beef cows now, and then we would feed cattle in a feedlot here, and we expanded that, made a lot of silage, and grew alfalfa hay and some corn and wheat and barley and those kind of crops. And so actually at this time too, my family was growing up and getting older, and my sons helped out a lot on the farm. We worked together. It was good. I remember my boys growing up, I used to tell them, I don't care if you don't farm, it doesn't matter to me, because I thought it'd be cheaper for me, but I was really using reverse psychology, and it did work. They both grew up and wanted to farm, and I'm so happy they did. And it's worked out so well now, because I still farm, do some of it, but they look after me when I can't be there, or they bought out about half of my operation, so it's worked out very good. And it's been a blessing now, especially in my senior years now, to be able to still be a part of it and still work with them. And theirs is a total separate operation, in the sense that I don't know all they're doing with theirs, but I have my little farming on the side that I enjoy doing. So it's worked out very good.
Hi, I'm Kim, and my life as a farmer's wife is a good one. I enjoy being on the farm and having freedom for my sons to be able to be outside and be in nature. and we've been really happy here. I have 2 sons, and both of my sons are autistic on different levels of autism. My oldest son is verbal, and he is more independent and able to do quite a few things by himself. He enjoys mowing grass. He's living in Brooks during the week at the home of some friends, and on the weekend he comes home, and he's a great worker. He loves to mow grass, and he'll spend a good part of a Saturday mowing grass. And my younger son is more severe, the degree of autism. He's not verbal more than a few words, but he loves being on the farm. He loves, instead of having a dog for his personal pet, he has cows. He really loves to go out and roam with the cows. He'll spend all day out in the pasture with the cows, and he'll just come in for meals and then go right back, say, outside, and away he goes again.
One other thing that Kim has done a lot of is teach English to the different peoples that have come into our community.
I've taught English 8 years ago. The Latino people showed up to work at, it's now called JBS, but at that time was called Lakeside, and they had come around and had requested English classes, and at the church they asked me if I would like to help with the English classes, and I was nervous to begin with because this would be people that I couldn't talk to. And I said to Joel, I'll do it if you'll come with me, because Joel is really good with making people feel at ease. And so we did it together, Joel and I. When I was growing up, I remember Mom used to always grow a garden, and she would get us kids to help her shell the peas. And I remember that's how we learned how to work, I think, was somewhat from that garden. We'd sit outside under the big maple tree, and we'd shell peas all afternoon, and it was a good way to learn a work ethic, I think, by growing up with that garden.
And you hated peas or liked them?
I hate peas. Still do.
This is our John Deere 9420. It's 425 horsepower. It has GPS in it, which is really nice for making a straight path. You'll do your pass, and your next one, if you have a 50-foot implement, you can just turn and it'll keep your same width for the next path, which makes it a lot nicer for working land. So we actually have a dozer for this tractor too, a 16-foot blade on the front. We can use it in the winter to push snow, or we've pushed silage when we pile silage. It works good for that too.
How wide can the thing be behind you that you pull it when you're planting or something?
Our air seeder is 51 feet, and the blade that goes on it is 16 feet in the front. So, yeah. And the cultivator's, what is it, 50 feet too, I guess. So
I think it's 24 miles an hour. It'll go
it's
down
made
there.
for pulling, not for speed.
Yeah, but it does have a power shift transmission, which is really nice. You just keep hitting the button and it goes faster and faster until you're up to speed.
If you have a flat tire, what does a new tire cost?
$3,000.
Is it?
Yeah.
How much?
3,000. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you got 8, so you're looking 25,000 to replace tires. Yes.
I think the fall's always been fun when you get the cattle back off the grass and see what they're looking like, and see your year's work is what, yeah. It's enjoying seeing what your labor produced or whatever, I guess. So yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, you know, like working with your dad, and how is that?
I guess I inherited his love for, he probably likes horses better, but we always loved cattle better, so we inherited his love for the cattle, I guess, and that's what we wanted to do. So even when we were kids, we'd have to silage, so we'd be silaging and stuff, and your summers were so busy or whatever, and sometimes I wondered if it was just a way to keep us from getting into troubles because we were silaging all the time, working all the time. But yeah, so key for success, I guess, here is the blessing of God. Is if without the blessing of God, it wouldn't be a success whether you made money or not. So one thing about my father, he's usually his yes is yes and his no is no. And one thing kind of funny about him, when he gets something on his mind, it's got to be done now. I can remember when we were young and I wanted to go on a date. Oh, this girl on a Saturday, and I was hoping to go, but no, he had something on his mind. It was the wheel lines that had to get done. When he gets something on his mind, it's got to be done now. It's not waiting. It's now time to go. So, yeah. No, but we've appreciated his wisdom and stuff. One thing about him, he'll share if you want to hear. I know some people have said of him before, if you don't want the truth or what he thinks, don't ask and don't waste his time, because he'll tell you the truth, what he thinks, and then it's up to you whether you want to listen or not. So yeah, but I appreciate he'll do what he thinks the Lord wants him to do, whether it's popular or not. So yeah. So he's what you'd call a man's man.
That's what they say. The men are men out here in the prairies, and the women are glad of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we both hate being on camera.
This land that Kevin and Brent are on today came about because of the divine favor that the Lord gave to Bill through another godly neighbor.
Well, this was part of the land that I bought at that time too. The boys own this now. There was a rancher, he passed away now. I don't know how many times I thanked him. He just gave me a check to cover it. And I seen this other guy said, your money's laying at the lawyer's. And his eyes pretty near popped out of his head. And I said, no, it's there. So I had a deal. Otherwise, I think he'd have backed out of probably. I thanked that guy so many times. He always said, I should have partnered with you. But I paid him back when I got my finances arranged. And so this is where my sons live. This is where Kevin lives, his first house here. And Brent lives in the next one. When I sold it to him, I said, put your names on each of a quarter, so if you ever do have trouble, you each have your own. I was involved with full gospel businessmen for a number of years. I think about 12 years I was president in Brooks. I got invited over many places to speak at that time, and my testimony is rather a simple testimony. And it was interesting, I would go, and I said, the only thing I can guarantee, I said, the Holy Spirit will come. And God would always move, it seemed like. He has showed me favor in that and a lot of times, and I spoke at many different places, seen God do many different miracles, traveled in a number of countries, traveled in Yugoslavia from one end of the country to the other, seen God do miracles. Being in the full gospel was an interesting experience, and I remember my father and mother and Audrey and I went over to Vancouver one time, I think it was Victoria maybe, to a full gospel meeting, and we were very interested in the things of God. And I remember at the end of the service I said to Audrey, if one of these guys comes back past us, I'm going to ask him to pray for us. And so sure enough, one of the guys came right straight to us, and I asked him to pray for us. And he said, oh, you want the baptism of the Holy Spirit? I said, no, I've got that. I said, oh, and he kind of backed off, and he prayed for us. And I'll never forget, the next morning at 5 after 4 in the morning, the Lord woke me up and spoke to me. And he said, Bill, do you love me more than your farms? Bill, do you love me more than Audrey and Kim and Kevin and Brent? And he even asked me if I loved him more than my horses. I'll never forget it because it was very intimate with me and God at that moment. And the first verse I read that morning was Revelation 3, verse 8. I know your works. Behold, I've set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I tell you, those scriptures have went with me for years, and I've watched many times people try to shut doors. They can't shut them. God opens another door. It always happens that way, and He's been with us, and I just was so blessed by that word, and I've thought about that many times. I've set before you an open door. And I think He says that to you too. There's a door that God wants to open for you if you just step back and allow Him to do it. He will open it for you. Those dreams and those things that you get, God is a fulfiller of dreams and visions. And I've observed that over the years, that it's such a privilege to know that our lives are entwined so much with God and they're His idea. And so in the full gospel it was interesting, and then after that I was traveling quite a bit, going to different countries and different places. And I remember my son Kevin, he came to me. He was quite young at that time. Even at 12 years old, he was working in the field in a big four-wheel drive tractor, driving it. And I remember him, I was traveling quite a bit. I remember he came to me one time, he said, you know, Dad, you can go, I'll look after things. And I never forgot that, because as a young guy and running around as much as I was, it was wonderful to me, and to know that he was happy to do that. So it was sometime after that, the Lord spoke to me out in the tractor here in the field and said, I want you to start a church in Brooks. I was in the tractor, and I remember I stopped and built a church. And it was I can't say how He spoke to me, if it was quietly or audibly or to my heart, I do not know, but I know He spoke to me. And He said, I want you to start a church in Brooks, but I don't want you to take a bunch of people out of the church you're in. And He gave me some instructions about how to do it. And I was a real man. I broke down and cried. You know, don't cry a lot, but I didn't know what to do. And I remember I had a friend that had worked with me in Full Gospel Businessmen, and he'd moved to Lethbridge. And so he said, why don't you come down and meet my pastor? And so I still remember Audrey and I were driving to Lethbridge, and we looked over and we talked, and I said, what if this isn't it? I don't know how to start a church. And so we drove down and met with his pastor, and his pastor was Pastor George Hill, and he met with us for lunch, and he said, well, what did you want? I said, well, I just had this, Lord spoke to me about starting a church. And he said, well, come up and start one in 2 weeks. And I said, you don't even know me. He said, I've heard about you. And I said, I don't know if I can get a hotel in that time. He said, we'll come in 2 weeks. We'll bring everything. Children's ministry, preach, special music, whatever, we'll bring it. June 1987, and we started the church. We had a fair group, came together, and it was good, and so they would come every week and do that, and all I did was arrange the hotel. But it was funny, at the end of every meeting, especially one of the speakers would come, he'd come and he'd say at the end of the meeting, now Bill, do you got anything to say? And you got a word? I said, no, don't have no. And just like that, I'd have a word. Oh yeah, I do have one. The Lord would give me something to say, I don't know why. And this went on for quite a while. We had a number of different speakers come in and speak, and every one pretty well would ask and say, you know, how about you come being our pastor? And everybody would say, well, what about you, Bill? I said, I'm not a pastor. I'm a businessman. I'm a farmer. I'm not a pastor. I don't even want to be a pastor. And so this went on till about December, I think, of the same year. And then they asked me and said, well, would you be the pastor? And I said, I'll be the pastor, but I want 100% vote. And so I got 100% vote.
But at the time, we didn't know that he would become the pastor of that church. and I would become a pastor's wife. And I was very reluctant, but I know that when God calls the husband, it's the call on the wife as well, because we are one and we share in the same burden and responsibility and call when we are one, and we work together there, trying to fulfill God's call in our lives, not knowing really how to do that, but saw the faithfulness of God and His call.
The Lord had spoken to me and said to build an office in this house downstairs. And I said, Audrey said to me, "What do you want an office for?" I said, "I don't know, I'm supposed to do it." And we built this office, and then I knew after a while I was called to be a pastor and was a pastor. I had to have somewhere to study. And I'd go down there, all of a sudden I was preaching twice on Sunday. I taught on Wednesday, Audrey and I had youth on Friday, and then Saturday morning I met with the men for prayer, and I was busy. Because one of the things I didn't like was studying anyway, and I just about went crazy when I heard the combines going outside, and I'm sitting downstairs studying because I'm an outdoors guy. I like to be outdoors, I like to do things, and I'd come up the stairs and say, "Audrey, I can't do this." And she'd say, "Oh, you can, Bill, sure, go ahead." And I'd go back down and study some more. And I learned to like to study. And I learned a lot of things, and the Lord blessed it. The church started to grow, and my family came along with me. My children helped. Kevin used to lead worship some, and Kim, she was really good. You know, it is interesting. I guess I can tell this. The first Sunday I preached, and this is kind of funny, I preached, and I was absolutely so worn out afterwards. I come home, I just gave it all I had. And I'm sitting on the Chesterfield over there, and then I realized I got to preach tonight. I don't know what happened. And I still remember Kim, she said, "Dad, I'll help you." She was the studious one. She liked books. She was studious, so she helped me, and I got a sermon. That's the way we started. And Brent, he was always a help being around too, and he ushered for years and still is ushering. And the family supported. I was always grateful for that my family came along and were not bitter about it.
Of all the roles I played in life, being a pastor's wife was the greatest challenge, and it also was a great joy. But I tended to be a thin-skinned person earlier in my life, but I had to learn to get a thick skin. There are many challenges that come your way, and dealing with people of various backgrounds and personalities, but I learned to accept people at face value for who they were, and each one an individual and unique gift from God.
Building that you see behind you, it came a number of years after we got started. First we started in the hotel, then we went and rented an upper room downtown here that we're in for a number of years.
During the ensuing years, the Victory Church of Brooks grew and grew. It was always a missions church, with outreaches to Mexico, India, China, and Israel, as well as busing kids in for Sunday school while their parents slept in on Sunday morning.
We wound up having 2 buses running out to pick up children, and we had wonderful workers. And if the church wouldn't have succeeded if it wasn't for all the wonderful workers that helped out to build it. I say that about business, I say that about church. It's all about the people that come together to work together in unity and harmony to make something happen. And we were blessed with many, many wonderful people that stepped up to the plate and helped out and worked in many different ways.
I led ladies' Bible studies, and we had some very good times together, and ladies' prayer groups. And we found that there were always faithful people to come and alongside and help us in the work of the ministry. I was enlarged beyond, in many ways, beyond anything that I ever thought I could do. And God loves to stretch us, so we know that we're not reliant in our own abilities, although those are given to us by God as well. But He enables us to do what He calls us to do. I also love to sing. We had a choir that would sing at Christmas and Easter productions, and I love to be in the choir. I still wish I was part of a choir today. And I think I was about 8 years old when I first got enough courage to sing a solo in church.
On a Good Friday morning it was, we moved over here, if I remember right. And there was such joy and excitement about it. We had everybody pitched in and helped. And we started in the new building, and then the building burnt down. It was burnt down by somebody, we don't know who it was. I got a phone call at 5 after 4 in the morning. My brother phoned, and actually my brother was the one that gave this land that the church is on. He gave it to us for $1, so that's a pretty good deal, I think, and we are so grateful to him for doing that too. But the church burnt down, and then what do? I walked around in the ashes over here for I don't know how long that afternoon, and then the paper from Calgary came out. The Sun came out when I was walking around there, and they did just about a full page thing on it. He followed me around and he said, "Bill, how can you be so optimistic?" I said, "If it's worth burning down, we'll build and build bigger." So it burnt down, and we were going to have a conference that fall. We were going to have a prophetic conference, and there was different people going to speak at it, and one of the speakers was Kjell Sjöberg he's passed away now, from Sweden. And I'll never forget, we were taking him to the airport, driving back, and he leaned over and he said, "Bill," he said, "I pray that your insurance policy will be on the top of the pile. The right person will be there to sign the check, and you will get this in a few weeks." He prayed that, and I'll never forget it, because it was only probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and I was a little nervous that this could take years or something. Sometimes those things do. I get a phone call. We were insured with an outfit in Medicine Hat, and they called us down. So my father and I drove down, and I'll never forget, walked in, sat down. They said, "You know what, it's really interesting." He said, "We were over in Vancouver, and here your policy was on the top of the pile, and the guy was there to sign the check." And he said, "Well, I'll just mail it out." And the guy we were talking to said, "No," I said, I'll just take it out there, and you can get it quicker that way." Just exactly how that old prophet had spelled it out, and we got it, and they even paid us for volunteer work that we'd done before. It was such a blessing to us, and so we were able to pay our bills and go ahead and build a new place. And to build a new place, I hired it pretty well all done, because I didn't want to try to get the people to do it all again, because they'd worked so terrible hard. We got paid for what they did before, and so we hired somebody, and we did some, but it worked out very good.
After several years, the Lord spoke to Bill to enlarge the church, but he waited on God for the unity necessary.
And I remember I brought it to the board, and the board, about half of them were for it, and about half of them didn't want it. And somebody said at the board meeting, "Well, go talk to the people about it." I said, "I'll never talk to the people till we're 100% sure here that we want to do it." I said, "I won't do that." And so it was interesting. I think it was about a year and a half, we'd have a board meeting, and somebody would speak up and says, "You know, God spoke to me out in the field. I think we're supposed to build that." And somebody else would find it, "I think we're supposed to do that." And so I think it was about a year and a half or so, and at a meeting, everybody agreed we should build. And I said, "Now I'll go to the people." I said, I think I asked it 3 times. "Are you sure? You all agree as a board? We'll go and we'll recommend this to the people." And everybody, yes. So I went to the people and I said, "We as a board feel that we're supposed to add on." And so at that point, we did that, built on, and it was wonderful, because we're in unity to do it, and it worked out good, and God blessed. And it was a thrilling time when we burnt the mortgage, and it's been a good time. We've had a lot of interesting things, met many people, and many people have come through, and we were privileged to see many lives changed. I remember I had a good rapport with a couple of the mayors in town, very good rapport. We used to visit some and enjoyed that. The chief of police, years ago, he used to stop and we'd visit, and had many good talks together, learned lots, and Actually, he wound up being a pastor later on after that too. I remember one time in town here they were going to have whether they should have an escort service would let them come in or not. And so a bunch of Christians went down, and a friend of mine and myself went and sat down. I wasn't figuring on saying anything. But at the end of the meeting, they looked over where we were sitting, and they said, "And what do you guys think?" And I was amazed. The Lord spoke through me. I don't even know what I said, but people came up afterwards and said, "Oh, that was so powerful." And after I spoke, they said they just throwed it out. It was done. It was finished.
Passing on the faith of their fathers to the kids, grandchildren, and other young people has been a lifelong ambition for Bill and Audrey.
Well, I love to quilt, and I guess it's part of my heritage to be a quilter as well. And I got this idea that it would be nice to give my grandchildren each a quilt in memory of me. But it was a daunting task when I first thought of it because I have 9 grandchildren. But I love to quilt, so I started out, and I noticed that as I was sewing for each individual one, I had many happy memories coming to me of the times when they were young, and I spent more time with them than I do when they get older. But each one is a labor of love. And I just count it a privilege, and I can hardly wait to deliver them when they're finished, to see their happy faces and the appreciation they have for each one that I've sewn. And this is my granddaughter, Tanya, and this is the quilt I sewed for her.
Yeah, it's a great privilege to be able to accept this amazing, beautiful quilt that Grandma made for me and that she does for each grandchild. It's really precious to us, and it's something that we will always have to remember Grandma. And it's really cool how she does, she gives it a name and then actually writes in her handwriting the date or the year that she made it. And it says, "Made with love," by Audrey Martin for my granddaughter Tanya, and then she actually colored it in as well. So Grandma makes each quilt special by giving it a name, and she actually had a hard time deciding what to call this quilt. So Grandpa actually gave her the idea to name it Cornered.
Now here I've got a granddaughter that wants to go out on the mission field. She's been in Africa once and went over there and just loves to work with his orphanage over there. So the Victory has an orphanage over there, and she's going to go over there for 6 months. She's planning on going here in about 2 weeks, and she was sharing with us the other day about going, and she just lights up.
When I went to Kenya for my first mission trip, it totally got my mind off of the things that I was dealing with. And I was focusing on someone else, helping someone, and it just kind of gave me a different perspective.
Dad was a great dad. He always was there for us and always looked after us. And whenever I had problems, I could talk to my parents, and they always had really good advice to give me. And I remember it was back when I was dating my husband, Joel, and I said to my dad, "What should I do?" because things were getting kind of serious. And he said, "Oh, you better hang on to him. He's a prince of a man."
Just, I don't know, family times. We took a few holidays or whatever. I look back on them as good memories too, as we traveled together. We drove across Canada one year, which was neat to see the whole country. And I don't know, I just think now that my kids are growing up or whatever, and just seeing them want the Lord in their life too, it's just really exciting to see them want to serve the Lord. And even Mary and our daughter just got engaged, to see her pick a man that's a God-fearing guy too, it's exciting to see. and our youngest is going to Africa right away to be a missionary to orphans there.
Oh, working with Dad and my brother has been fun, and I think it's been enjoyment. And I think when we get older, we'll look back on these years very fondly, working together, and even with our kids and grandkids around and stuff, and you can bring them to work and in the tractor and stuff. It's a family affair, and it's a blessing from God.
We have seen the faithfulness of God in the past 29 years of leading this congregation, birthing it and seeing it grow, and people's lives being changed. And it seems that the years go by very quickly, and it became evident that it was becoming time for us to turn the church over to the next generation that was coming up. And we are happy that Pastor Jordan Fuller has come to lead our congregation and to take it on in the next phase of God's plan for the future.
And that's the thing that I would say about Bill and Audrey, is that they risked and they've stood firm. That no matter what has faced them, they've still stood firm. When things didn't go well a few years back, they still stood firm. So they've risked, they've stood, and they've kept the faith, right? If you listen in a room, you'll hear a laugh, and that'll be Bill's. You can't not hear it, and there's still a joy that's there amidst the risk and the standing.
When we first put this up, the Lord had a word that He was going to bring the world to Brooks. And now we have seen that. Many different nationalities have come of all kinds. I think there's 70 different nationalities here in Brooks. And it's a real privilege that we can reach out as a church and touch the world even from one location. And I'm so happy that Pastor Jordan and Tamsin have come and they've taken over the church now. They've been here about 5 years, I think, now. And it's a privilege to see God's work going on. And God bless you. It's a privilege to speak to you. Seek God. He loves you. You're His idea. God bless you.
Rocks and plains and visions of trains from sea to sea. Forêts et lacs, aurore boréale du grand nord silencieux.
Mountains of snow, forest below, hopes and fears.
Frozen lands in the rugged hands of Canadian pioneers.